The Gilded Age, a time period spanning arguably from the end of the Civil War to the beginning of the events leading up to World War I. A time of corruption. To fully understand the Gilded Age, you must first understand its name. The name Gilded Age was adopted from a book by Mark Twain. Gilded Age means covered by a thin layer of gold, but underneath it's not real. Seems appropriate considering that the nearly royal businessmen were sitting on their thrones, taking as many terms as they wanted, and intentionally holding down the rest of America so that there would always be someone there to shine their shoes for less than a dirty penny.
Like the president, for instance.
This is America's story of rags to riches.
The Gilded Age. After the Civil War, America was left in ruins. Other countries looked down on it as if America wouldn't last much longer, and without a lot of money, it looked as if a couple of extraordinary men was just what our country needed.
Cornelius Vanderbilt was important in laying the groundwork for the business tactics used in the Gilded Age. He specialized in transportation, first in boats, then in trains. He died at age 82 with $105 million. That's $2 billion in today's money. He was the richest man in America at the time.
John D. Rockefeller, an American, was born on July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York. Rockefeller always saw an opportunity when it presented itself. A railroad was built in 1863 connecting Cleveland to a number of major oil refineries which had recently opened in a large oil field. Rockefeller bought his first oil refinery in less than a decade. Rockefeller successfully established the Standard Oil Company and had nearly total control over the region's oil. Later, Rockefeller started moving his company east across Pennsylvania, connecting his company by an advanced system of pipelines which no one had ever done before. He was able to transfer his product faster to be sold anywhere. In this way, he dominated the oil industry throughout the entire nation, and his net worth grew to $55 million.
That's $1.3 billion in today's money. Thousands of acres of forest fuel was scooped up. In 1882, John D. Rockefeller founded the Standard Oil Trust, a new type of company that ensured his monopoly and made the industry impenetrable by other entrepreneurs. Although Rockefeller's business tactics increased his wealth, they didn't exactly make him too popular with the public. Previously, states began to create anti-monopoly legislation, making it so that the Sherman Antitrust Act could be passed in 1890. In fear, the 56-year-old Rockefeller became less involved with his company and began minor philanthropy in 1895. His new ways did not affect the general view of him.
Andrew Carnegie, Scottish, born on November 25, 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland. He knew mainly how to read and write, and reading was in his parents' eyes extremely important. In 1848, Carnegie moved to Allegheny, Pennsylvania. Going through a number of different jobs, he learned a lot about business. Working for the railroad, he began making his first investments in steel. By the 1870s, Carnegie Steel was founded. Andrew Carnegie opened up mills across the U.S., quickly making his company the largest of its kind. The steel production in the United States would never be the same. He was very successful, and once again we see how 19th century entrepreneurs were given every chance to control the entire industry. By the beginnings of the 1890s, the company's ways became outrageous. At Homestead, wages were reduced and hours were increased to 12 hours a day. As Carnegie was away on vacation, the employees took a strike and boarded up the steel mill, not letting anyone in or out. Carnegie took an extended absence and left his assistant Henry Frick to do his dirty work. Frick was given permission to use any force necessary. The Pinkertons, a government private army, were Frick's first choice to clear through the protesters. On July 6, 1892, in the morning, 300 Pinkerton agents crossed the river and laid siege to the Homestead mill. Some of the workers were armed, but many threw rocks and dirt. By 10 a.m., both sides had receded. The Union protesters had dispersed, but the Pinkertons were called off around 11 o'clock. They raised a white flag. They wanted to stop the violence and settle the dispute. The Pinkertons left and the strike was called off. State law enforcement eventually intervened. Many lawsuits were filed against the Pinkertons, the Union laborers, and Henry Frick. As it turns out, both sides were charged with relatively the same charges, and they both agreed to stop all charges. Later that month, an anarchist attempted to kill Henry Frick, but he failed. Henry Frick took responsibility for all the events. Despite all his contributions to the company, Carnegie felt that Frick's bad reputation was holding back the company. By cruelty and narrow-mindedness of Andrew Carnegie, he was forced to resign.
John Pierpont Morgan, another American, was born in Hartford, Connecticut on April 17, 1837. Born into wealth, in his early career he worked for his father. In 1871, J.P. Morgan went out on his own and started his own company. Railroads were undertaking massive overexpansion. Being one of the most skilled financiers, J.P. Morgan specialized in consolidating troubled railroad companies. He took stocks from competing companies and formed joint stock companies. This was monopolizing in its most extreme form. Morgan eventually owned 1/6 of all the railroads in America. In 1878, New York reporters went to the lab of Thomas Edison. Edison was making an announcement that would change the world. He had invented a system of illumination through electricity. The public was not ready to accept these new light bulbs as safe until years later, but J.P. Morgan backed up Edison with $2 million to become the second largest stockholder. Thomas Edison's apprentice, Nikola Tesla, had a different design for the new light bulbs, but Edison believed that his design was too dangerous. So Nikola Tesla quit his job working for Thomas Edison and started his own company with investor George Westinghouse. Edison built the first electric chair using Tesla's design to show the world how dangerous it was. The press was present during the first electric chair execution. The result was a gruesome electrified body. They could care less whose design it was that killed the man. All they saw was electricity as dangerous. Edison had failed. In 1893, Westinghouse and Tesla built a powerhouse on the Niagara River. J.P. Morgan manipulated stocks and forced Westinghouse to sell the contract. After Morgan had control over the Niagara powerhouse, several stocks from the Edison Electric Board were sold to him, and he became the #1 stockholder and fired Edison from his own company. The name was changed to General Electric. In 1895, the U.S. Treasury went into a depression. In an example of how rich Morgan was, he bailed the government out.
In 1896, a man named William Jennings Bryan ran for president. His plan was to tear down the trust and large million-dollar companies. Now Bryan, the obvious Democrat, preached of how the trust oppressed lower-class economy. He was right, but Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller wouldn't have him as their president. At this point, J.P. Morgan hatched a plan. They would all have to put their differences aside to achieve their common interests. Morgan proposed to Rockefeller and Carnegie that they would have to buy their own president. They agreed that William McKinley, former governor of Ohio, would be the man for the job. He was a Republican, he believed in large business, and wouldn't cause any problems. They all donated more than $250,000 to McKinley's campaign, equal to more than $6 million. McKinley won the election and became the President of the United States. 4 more years of safety for the 3 entrepreneurs.
In the 16 years following 1895 of Rockefeller's life, articles and books were published about his business tactics and the corruption in controlling the trust. In 1911, Standard Oil was found by the Supreme Court to be in violation of the Sherman Act and was ordered to split up. The trust was broken into several smaller companies, and some of them are still around today. The major ones are Chevron, Exxon, and Mobil. As it turns out, with the companies broken up, Rockefeller's wealth rose 5-fold to $900 million. That's $213 billion in today's money, 4 times more than the richest man alive today. He should have done that years ago.
In 1900, a man similar to William Jennings Bryan ran for vice president. This man was Theodore Roosevelt. William McKinley won a second term, but Roosevelt won vice president. In the first year of McKinley's second term, he was assassinated and Roosevelt became president. From here on out, things would not be the same.
In 1901, J.P. Morgan bought Carnegie Steel for $480 million. That's $12 billion today. He merged it with several other companies to form U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation. In 1907, the New York Stock Exchange fell to less than 50% of its average. Once again, J.P. Morgan and several other top financiers in New York were there to help. They bailed out Wall Street one last time, but this stirred up much suspicion.
Henry Ford had an importance similar to that of Vanderbilt because he took down patents that claimed the right to all automobiles and revolutionized production all over the world with his assembly line.
In 1912, J.P. Morgan was brought before a U.S. congressional committee to be heard for the case of conspiring and manipulating the economy to his advantage. After this, more antitrust acts were created and J.P. Morgan's wealth was reduced slightly. On March 31st of 1913, John Pierpont Morgan died of a stroke in Rome, Italy at age 75. On the day of his funeral, the New York Stock Exchange was closed in his honor, an honor normally reserved for the president. His death inspired John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie to go into philanthropy.
When John D. Rockefeller went into philanthropy, he donated $530 million to various charities. That's more than $58 billion today. He founded the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller University and died May 23, 1937 in Ormond Beach.
When Andrew Carnegie died, his net worth was $475 million. That's $10 billion today. He donated more than $5 million to libraries in New York. He founded the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh and is given credit for opening more than 2,800 libraries across the nation.
And that is how, in a period of less than 50 years, America went from a failing experiment in democracy
to the greatest superpower in the world. And when war broke out in Europe, guess who Britain turned to for help?